The Gemini XI prime crew will be Command Pilot Charles Conrad and Pilot Richard Gordon, shown during a dry run of a photographic experiment at the McDonnell plant in St. Louis.
No, I'm looking forward to going again. I wish it was my 5th flight. It's been different because I'm in the other seat, and I had to learn on GT8 backing it up, all left seat procedures, and I'm really looking forward to going again. That's all I can say. I'm real happy to be over in the left seat. Sorry I'm not going to go outside. I didn't get a chance to do that. Dick's going to do that. It's really not command pilot, co-pilot, or this sort of thing. There's a very definite job that belongs in the right seat and a very definite job that belongs in the left seat. And this isn't one guy supporting the other. This is a real cooperative venture. Dick has to in the rendezvous, do all the backup calculations. If the computer runs right, the answers come out automatically over on the left side. If they don't, or it fouls up in the middle, it goes back to Dick. And I don't feel that there is such a thing as a command pilot in that sense, because this thing requires both of us to do the job. If I go on past experience, I say we have a very good chance of making the rendezvous. If you listen to all the 3 sigma possibilities that can happen to the booster insertion, the guidance system, and the spacecraft, the radar, and everything else, why, then you can get nervous and say, gee, we might not make it. I really won't know until we get there.
58, 59, to Patuxent where we first met. And when we left there, we both were in the same squadron in Miramar, Naval Air Station in San Diego. In fact, we were roommates on the USS Ranger for a short time before Pete came in the program. Well, I've known him long enough to learn to trust him, let's put it that way.
At the Martin, Baltimore plant, the launch vehicle for Gemini XI was erected in the vertical test stand.
Technicians here have moved X-ray equipment onto pad 19 to determine how serious a leak is in the oxidizer tank of the Titan II rocket that forced the postponement of today's Gemini XI flight. As soon as the leak was discovered during the early part of the pre-dawn countdown, astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon were awakened and notified of the trouble. At a nearby launching site, the countdown on an Atlas Agena Target rocket was halted as well. The leak was detected near the end of fueling operations this morning in the rocket's first stage oxidizer tank. A telltale red cloud could be seen around the tiny pinhole as the oxidizer evaporated. Because this propellant is dangerous, Air Force technicians have drained the oxidizer completely for the close-up inspection. At the moment, the astronauts are awaiting the completion of the X-ray inspection. Only then will they know how long their 3-day flight will have to be delayed.
T-minus 120 and holding. Our problem at Launch Complex 14. During the guidance command checks that were in progress, they started at the 135-minute mark in the countdown. We had about a 20-minute test that was due to end at about 1:15. During this test, as reported earlier, the autopilot system, which is located on a pod on the side of the Atlas vehicle, was supposed to respond to some commands from the flight control system of the Atlas vehicle. The hydraulics are brought on, and those 3 engines at the base of the Atlas vehicle, the sustainer and the twin booster engines, are supposed to respond to directions from the autopilot during this test. That is, these engines should swivel or gimbal in response to directions from the autopilot. Some readouts in the blockhouse have indicated that booster engine number 2 apparently did not respond to the signals from the autopilot. We do not know whether the difficulty is with the autopilot or with the booster at this time. However, this is strictly a reading in the blockhouse. The crew is looking over the problem at this time. In the meantime, the prime pilots, astronauts Pete Conrad and Dick Gordon, are in the White Room at the 100-foot level. They are standing by for a further report from Complex 14. Here is concerned with lighting for the rendezvous in orbit. It appears that we would not have enough time today to fix our autopilot problem, conduct the 2 launches, and still have proper lighting conditions for the rendezvous of the Gemini 11 spacecraft and the Agena 11 in orbit. Of course, that rendezvous is planned for the end of the first orbit of the mission. The lighting conditions would not be satisfactory if we get off too late this afternoon. The determination has now been made that we will not have enough time to launch. The mission has been postponed. We will get a report shortly on reschedule information. This is Gemini Launch Control.
The mission will be recycled 48 hours. That will put liftoff Monday morning. Flight Director Clifford Charlesworth reports that launch times will remain essentially the same. They'll be reworked some, but they will not change over 1 or 2 minutes. This is Gemini Mission Control, Houston.
Arriving at Pad 19, bringing astronauts Pete Conrad and Dick Gordon over here for another trip up the elevator to the 100-foot level. For them, I'm sure there's the hope that it's the last trip on the Gemini 11 mission. But there they go into the elevator, shaking hands with NASA's man here, Jim Ragusa. The elevator door closes and they head upstairs. And on this bright, sunny morning, they can look across from that elevator and see the preparations going over on Pad 14 for the Atlas Agena launch. They'll see the Agena again shortly after they get into orbit.
Astronauts Pete Conrad and Dick Gordon getting seated in the cockpit of the Gemini 11 spacecraft as the crewmen in the White Room go through the procedures of tying them into the spacecraft itself and, of course, tying them into the overall countdown. The pilots will not be able to view the Atlas Agena liftoff because of their location in the spacecraft with the hatches closed. However, by being part of the countdown, they will get a thorough report on the progress of the final phases of the count and, of course, the power phase of flight of the Atlas Agena. Now, T-minus 113 minutes, 32 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
This is the Atlas Agena Target Vehicle for the Gemini 11 mission on Monday, September 12th. At the beginning of this mission, it will enable us to evaluate some important aspects of one type of lunar rendezvous.
T-minus 40 seconds and counting.
It launches at 5 minutes past 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We're still looking good. T-minus 30 seconds and counting. T-minus 25 seconds and counting. As the test conductor monitors his console, he's getting his green lights. T-minus 20. T-minus 18 seconds and counting. We have the sequencer in. T-minus 15. All still looking good. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
As the Agena goes through all phases of powered flight to orbit without incident, the Gemini 11 spacecraft is counting down on Pad 19, about 90 minutes from launch. The crew, Command Pilot Charles Conrad and Pilot Richard Gordon, will execute maneuvers for rendezvous in their first revolution with the Agena. Space scientists have taught us to call this an M=1 rendezvous. We may imagine that it is a lunar landing vehicle that has aborted its descent to the moon. It is returning to rendezvous with the mother spacecraft. We can get a measure of the crew workload and procedures in such a situation. Gemini 11 is faced with a 2-second launch window. It must launch within 2 seconds of the planned liftoff or be scrubbed for this day.
Those explosive bolts. T-minus 15 seconds and counting. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have ignition.
The main engines of the Gemini launch vehicle ignite within the planned 2 seconds.
This has got to be the greatest ride in the world. It really is. It's a real thrill.
Yeah, the only problem with the Titan is we don't get to ride it every week, once a year. We had the opportunity to go through a 12,000-foot overcast here, and you really get an impression of what it's like to go straight up when you hit that thing.
Gemini 11 is inserted into an orbit of 149 by 86 nautical miles, almost the exact orbit called out by the flight plan. The Agena Target Vehicle is now beginning its second revolution. It is slightly more than 200 miles ahead of Gemini 11, but Gemini is catching up at some 500 miles an hour. On an M=1 rendezvous, events move fast. In 35 minutes, Command Pilot Conrad reported to Tenerife Tracking Station that he had the Agena in sight at about 75 miles. Over Australia, the command pilot executed his terminal phase maneuver, burning at 141 feet per second. At Hawaii, the Gemini 11 was in a braking maneuver. The command pilot came back on the air at California. We heard that now classic phrase first given by Pilot Stafford on Gemini 6 mission.
Okay, we're station keeping. Roger, outstanding.
To start out with, about the M=1 rendezvous, I think probably the most significant factor of the M=1 rendezvous is, although we had good information from the ground, we accomplished the rendezvous totally with information contained within the spacecraft. The rendezvous put us in station-keeping position right about the time we expected it to with respect to our fuel schedule, and we were quite pleased. We knew we had plenty of fuel both on board the Agena and in the Gemini to do the rest of the mission successfully.
After a station-keeping exercise, Command Pilot Conrad reported to spacecraft communicator John Young that Gemini 11 was ready for docking.
Hey, John, we're going to go ahead and dock at this time. Roger, it's okay, and you go for docking, over. Roger, you go for docking.
This is some movies of the one of us docking. I don't know which one it is, and realize these are taken at 6 frames a second, and you can see that docking is relatively a piece of cake. You just slide in there and the latches grab you, and it's rigidized before you can say anything. Very smooth operation.
We are docked. Rigid lights on. We confirm they're docked. Fine. Roger.
The time of dock was 1 hour, 38 minutes, and 18 seconds after launch. Gemini 11 had rendezvoused and docked in the first revolution. The earliest this had been accomplished after launch in any previous Gemini mission was the third revolution. 4 dockings were scheduled by Gemini 11, and 4 were completed. Both crew members docked the spacecraft, the command pilot twice and the pilot twice. The crew's working day now came to an end, and they were in a sleep period. When they awoke and began their morning, it was just past midnight on the ground. The major event of the second day would be an extra-vehicular activity of Pilot Gordon. Gemini 11 approached the United States on its 15th revolution. Everything was ready.
Now we're just south of San Diego.
The spacecraft hatch was opened at 24 hours, 2 minutes into the mission.
As in an earlier Gemini flight, extravehicular work proved exceedingly strenuous, and the pilot was able to complete only a portion of the assigned tasks. He was, however, able to connect a 100-foot-long tether for use in an experiment the following day.
What do we have, fella? You got it. You're hung on something out there. Got it. Good show. Both cameras are running. How you doing? Oh, I'm here. Huh? I'm here, I guess. Sure are. Right up, cowboy. Now, let's just sit down and take a rest. Huh? How you doing? Tired, Pete. All right, just rest. Yeah, you got plenty of time. Only been out 9 minutes. Just ride in like a cowboy.
Houston, roger.
Shoot, the voice recorder's not on. Voice recorder's on now. We're 9 minutes and 50 seconds into the evening. Just sitting on the nose breathing. How you doing? I'm breathing hard. Yeah? Well, just relax.
All of the training, all of the zero-G work that we had done, I could perform this whole operation in one parabola. This is a time period of about 25 seconds. And I decided that I would sit on the spacecraft and wedge my legs in between the TDA, the target docking adapter, and the spacecraft so that I could have the luxury of using both hands. But I was unable to actually sit on the spacecraft in the manner I had done in the zero-G airplane. I kept riding up off of it, so all I could use was my feet. And this was a very tiring operation in itself, in that I had to use my feet wedged between the spacecraft and the TDA to hold myself in place. Now, there were times where I could use both hands in this manner, but I kept slipping off so that I essentially had to use a left hand on a handhold and make this whole operation, or perform the whole operation with my right hand. Well, a little simple task that I had done many times in training to the tune of about 30 seconds lasted about 30 minutes. And this was a monumental task, really, as far as I'm concerned. I was really surprised. I had gotten everything that I wanted in terms of equipment, tethers, and everything else from all the people that we've worked with. It was my decision to go this way because I was so convinced that that task would be real easy to perform. Well, it was my error. It really wasn't easy to perform, and it was a great deal of work. When you look at these films, I've looked at them over and over again, and I say to myself, boy, how easy is that? It really looks like it's real simple, but there's what I tried to do. I tried to stay in that position so I could use both hands to unstow the tether and the tether clamp.
Most of that time he spent trying to force himself the rest of the way down. You can see that he's still a good foot above the nose of the spacecraft, and he just never could get down as far as he could in the zero-G airplane.
Here's the most frustrating experience in the world, and this is trying to put that clamp on. And you can see the way my right hand is going, that I had a great deal of difficulty in stabilizing it so I could get a little bit of friction on it. Every time I'd tighten it down and turn loose of it to get a new purchase on it, I'd bump it or hit it, and it would just spin on the docking bar. Then I'd have to stop it and put it in the right position. The position had to be fixed so that Pete and I both could see the status display panel on the Agena for the burn. So it had to be precisely in place before it could be locked down. And all I'm doing there is batting that thing around the docking bar. Once I got a little bit of friction on this clamp, it could hold it in place, I actually let go of my feet and actually floated and held on with both hands and finished clamping it down. This essentially completed the attachment of that tether.
And you can see how high he is now, and it just was a tremendous workload to hang on with that left hand and his 2 feet just squeezing the nose, where before he'd always been able to get his knees up inside the TDA and let go with both hands. Now, this is another rest period, and it also represents a portion of time that I turned the camera off and then brought it back on again. Now, right near, he gives up trying to stay down on the Agena and finally floats up hanging on with his left hand and does the last part of the clamping down of the clamp, floating above the spacecraft.
As you can see, we had the Agena inertial control mode. It is rolling, or it appears to roll to the left in relationship to the Earth. We had to go to this inertial mode to keep the sun angle in a proper perspective to the open hatch. If we could stay in this mode, we could leave the hatch open all the time. That's the only way you can rest out there. You can really rest if you float around a while, and if you assume a position that the suit wants to put you in, which is about what you saw there. It's a fairly relaxing position, and you really don't have to exert too much effort to stay that way. It looks to me like the job is done. It looks like that tether's starting to come in. For all the problems we had, I really feel that every bit of effort that was expended out there was worth that tether exercise, because it was one of the most interesting things we did during the flight. I'm sure all of you that heard part of the air-to-ground in real time can probably imagine the amount of work that it was. Well, I was so single-minded at this time that I was going to get that tether on come hell or high water. And the tether was finally put in place. And then I came back to the spacecraft hatch pretty exhausted at this time and wanted to stand there and rest. We were a little bit behind by now, but we had a D16 to perform and then go back to the adapter. Well, it so happened that the tremendous heat load that I put on the ELSS overtaxed its capabilities, and it was cooling, it was working to design, I feel, and it was bringing the temperature down. But I had exerted so much energy that it was going to be a considerable length of time before I was able to do anything. Nighttime was approaching us, and I wanted to get back in the adapter before it got dark. I was bothered with sweat in my right eye. It stung. I could blink my eye. I still had some vision out of it. It wasn't really as bad as initial reports led to believe. But it was a consideration that we had to take into account to make the decision whether we would continue the umbilical EVA or not. Well, the timing, the exhaustion, the heat, the sweat, all of these things led to the decision that we would ingress at that time and discontinue the umbilical EVA.
On the next revolution, the hatch was opened briefly to jettison equipment associated with EVA. The crew now had a little more elbow room in their spacecraft. For the rest of the day, they worked on experiments. 11 were in the flight plan. The crew now slept about 5 hours. They awoke in their 25th revolution. The mission was more than half over. At the beginning of the 26th revolution, Command Pilot Conrad received a go for a burn of the primary propulsion system, the PPS of the Agena.
Gemini 11, here's Q. We've got a go for your PPS burn. Roger.
And that was a big burn. 26 seconds on the end of that 16,000 pounder is just a fantastic ride in itself. Going from 0 G to about 1.1 G eyeballs out, and it seems like it reaches full thrust in about 5 milliseconds. It's all on. It's just one big bang out there, and you're at 1.0, 1.1 G.
He lit the big Agena engine over the Canaries. It added a velocity of 920 feet per second to the orbit of the combined vehicles. The Agena carried Gemini 11 to a new altitude record, reaching an apogee of 739 4/10 nautical miles over Australia. We are 325 miles higher than the old altitude set in July by Gemini 10.
Can I have an 11? Okay, everything's go up here and the world is round. You got a good view? I mean, it's spectacular. Girl, it's utterly fantastic. You wouldn't believe it.
Passing India, it became apparent to us that we were just climbing at a fantastic rate. I don't know what the exact numbers were, but they were extremely high. And we could see this. We just had the impression that we were looking down at the ground going straight up.
We were wondering if we were going to stop or not.
We were worried about the orbital mechanics. And we did this for 2 revs, and we saw some of the most amazing sights that I guess man's ever seen. And I hope that the photographs, I think they do some justice to what we saw, but you just can't do justice to what you can actually see with your eyes. And that portion of the flight plan was extremely successful, and we got data on all things that we set out to get, and better than we expected, actually, especially in the photographic work, both for weather and terrain studies. And I think we got enough ion ambient density measurements to keep 5 cooperative students busy for a year out there in California for the prime experimenter reducing data. And so he's happy.
The crew remained in this orbit for 2 revolutions.
After 2 orbits, the crew used the Agena propulsion system to return to a lower orbit.
The command pilot executed a retrograde burn of the Agena PPS. It decreased the orbital velocity 918 feet per second. spacecraft and its docked target vehicle then returned to the lower orbit of 164 by 156 nautical miles. The day had been busy. For the first time since they awoke 6 hours ago, the crew had time to eat breakfast. The pace did not slow down. On the 29th revolution, the crew was ready to begin a third EVA for photography from an open hatch.
And we, at that point, had 2 hours of EVA prep for the stand-up EVA, and this is where the practice paid off. Instead of being ahead of the game this time, we were behind in that we hadn't eaten a meal, we were hungry, we needed a meal, we had a long day in front of us. And so we went ahead and we took an hour and we ate breakfast, and our practice paid off well enough that we were ready to go for the stand-up EVA on time. It took us just about, actually it took us about a third of the time that we'd planned to use to do it, and we accomplished it all and went into the stand-up EVA and got the photographs that we wanted to get, and they've all turned out to be very good.
Pilot Gordon shot synoptic terrain and weather photographs of the type familiar from past flights. He also performed an ultraviolet photography experiment. The stand-up EVA ended over Hawaii on the 30th revolution. It had lasted 2 hours, 11 minutes, setting, as the spacecraft communicator put it, a new world's outdoor record. Spacecraft and Agena had been docked since the first day. They had flown together through 3 EVAs and an altitude record, but now they would undock.
Say, we're going to hate to leave this Agena. It's been pretty kind to us. Sure has.
After undocking, the command pilot pulled the tether taut. The purpose is to investigate modes of stabilizing a space vehicle during station keeping without using maneuvering fuel.
So we started our undocking, and it took longer to get the tether deployed than we thought it would. We had it put down on a couple of pieces of Velcro before it went into the tether stowage bag, and we got that off. And actually, they pulled us into the TDA a little bit, and we got the deployment going. And then at the 50-foot mark, it went into another compartment in the stowage box, and this allowed the thing to be packed very tightly on that side, so it hung up again, and we hadn't really realized that this stretch was going to pull us back in again, and so I had to hit it a couple of times before I got it deployed all the way. You can get an idea of the tether gyrations there. We haven't really gotten the spin started yet. I was still just trying to get the skip rope out of it. Now, part of that looping that you saw, I may have been firing some forward firing thrusters, and that tended to bullet or something if it was out in front of the thruster. Now we've gotten it almost out taut, and it's pulling us back in again. And we finally got it out all the way, but we'd passed the amount of time that it would have taken us to get the thing set up to try for the gravity gradient. And what we had done there was we were going to get it where we had the Agena inertial, and as it went through the local vertical, if we were directly above it, we'd try to have it stabilize in the gradient. But we'd passed the time to do that, so we just went to the next part of the plan, which was to spin it up. And that's when we found something that we hadn't realized you could do, and it's perfectly obvious. We got somehow got a little rotational velocity in the tether, and it started doing this, and every time I tried to back out, it got going faster and pulled me right back in again. And I was about determined that I should start out with an absolutely straight tether. Actually, I could have started out with it spinning, and it wouldn't have made any difference. But at that time, I worked and worked and worked, and I can't tell you how I got it stopped, but I got it stopped spinning to where we finally got the tether completely straightened out, and we wanted to roll upside down to the Agena and fire aft to take out the lateral forward thrust that we get out of our lateral thrusters and fire it down to start the spin. And the biggest thing that we'd seen in the simulator is that we would get excursions in attitude with respect to the tether out of both vehicles. And the conclusion was, from the simulations, and mine included, was that the best thing to do was not touch anything once we started to spin and let it damp by itself. And so we got all set up, and we were going to fire aft for 10 seconds and down for 10 seconds simultaneously. And so I fired aft and down and turned loose the control system and turned it off. And then the fun began, and we started to get I guess, in the order of 45-degree attitude excursions on the Gemini. and it looked like only about 20-degree attitude excursions on the Agena. And I guess our surprise also was the elastic effect of what a little bit of slack looks like, because when I stopped firing, I had the impression that we shot back in towards the Agena in a sort of a slingshot effect, because we saw a great loop in the tether and it went completely slack, and I thought, holy Christmas, we're going to go all the way in and hit it, which we decided was impossible, because if we had any centrifugal force at all, it would keep us away. But it just wasn't apparent to me that we actually had the centrifugal force. But very shortly thereafter, the tether, we went to the end of the tether and started to hit the end of it very, very gently. And it also became obvious to us, even though we had the large attitude excursions, that we were actually had the whole system spinning. And so we watched it for about 20 minutes, and for 20 minutes it really wasn't apparent to us that the attitude excursions were damping, but they were in fact damping, and they damped down to, I'd say, about 30 degrees, so we told the ground we'd go ahead and ride it into the night side.
Linked together by the 100-foot tether and retaining a slight tension, a spinning motion was imparted to create a small gravity field, constituting the first such exercise in tether dynamics. The exercise confirmed the feasibility of station keeping in the tethered mode to save fuel.
We've started to spin.
That tether is taut.
This is later on. Here's the tether taut, and it's also wound up like the rubber band. We've been rolling very slowly with respect to the Agena, and we wound up the tether, but you can see that it's nice and taut. By this time, we had a taut tether, and although we had attitude excursions, we were rolling very slightly with respect to the Agena, so that we were constantly rolling right, and we were beginning to twist the tether. And throughout the two revs, we always continued to roll right. We never did wind the tether up far enough to get enough torsion in it to unwind us. And the whole system, with respect to one another, continued to roll up in a very, very low order right roll. We went into the night side, and we had our docking light on the tether. We could see that the tether stayed taut. We had the running lights on the Agena, and we could tell that the Agena was still oscillating out there, but our biggest surprise when we came out into daylight was how low the attitude excursions had gotten. Both vehicles were down to less than 10 degrees, and the Agena was pretty constantly flying out in front of us, cocked up slightly, so that the tether was right through the CG of the Gemini and right through the CG of the Agena, and the only time we lost sight of it was on the very initial spin-up. When we shot back in, it dropped down in front of me and to the left, and for the rest of the time, no matter what the excursions were, why, I could always see it, or Dick could always see it out his window. And we began to feel pretty comfortable about it. And about the time we felt comfortable about it, the ground wanted us to spin it up again.
The ground took our comfort away.
And the only reason that I felt uncomfortable about trying to spin it up higher was that it was very difficult to determine exactly which way the whole system was rotating. So we very carefully watched our rate needles and waited till we were both in agreement that I was in the right direction to apply thrust again in the plane of rotation to add velocity to it. And so we fired aft and down for about 3 more seconds. And we got, with the centrifugal force that was already on the tether, we got a tremendous slingshot out of it this time, but we were expecting it, except I didn't expect to see quite as large excursions, and we got up to about 60 degrees, and that was too much for my piloting instinct to stand, and I said, the heck with not touching it, and I fired up the control system in the pulse mode, and all I did was kill the Gemini rates. And as soon as I did, the whole system damped down to where it was stable again. It was less than 10-degree oscillations, and we had it was apparent to us that we'd fired in the right direction, that it was spinning faster, and that the system was very well damped at this time. And with that, we felt we were old pros, so we didn't even bother to look at the Agena anymore, and we went off and ate another meal.
Station keeping in this mode became so uneventful that at one stage, the crew took time out for a bite to eat.
Other is maintaining tension at all times. I'm impressed.
A planned gravity gradient stabilization experiment could not be done because of spacecraft control system problems.
After 2 revolutions, the tether was released by jettisoning the docking bar on the nose of the spacecraft. Gemini 11 now separated from the Agena with a velocity change of 9 feet per second, and the last full day of the mission was over. As the crew slept, Mission Director Bill Schneider and his flight director discussed the addition of a re-rendezvous maneuver to the flight plan. and Thursday morning the plan was discussed with the crew and agreed upon. Trailing Agena by 25 miles, Gemini 11 would essentially initiate a terminal phase maneuver and re-rendezvous. Computations would be supplied from the ground. The second mission rendezvous was made over Africa at 50 feet range. Propellant consumption was low, 65 pounds.
The rendezvous itself was, as they say, a piece of cake, because we came up to that Agena and we were in position to dock. That's how easy that particular rendezvous went.
After this, Command Pilot Conrad separated from the Agena for the last time. Gemini 11 was now slightly more than 3 hours from Retrofire. The flight plan called for an automatic retrofire and re-entry. The onboard computer would bring the spacecraft in. The crew would jettison the equipment section, but from that point, their job was done, unless a contingency arose. On the 44th revolution over Canton Island, after more than 70 hours of flight, Gemini 11 retrofired automatically.
We flew the normal manual reentry procedures until we had assured ourselves that we had proper guidance from the computer, that we were in fact in the right place as far as the computer was concerned, and this was about 260,000 feet, I'd guess. And I manually rolled to the roll needle, which at that time was asking for lift vector full up, and at that point switched it into the auto mode where it was damped in the rate command system at 4 degrees per second in pitch and yaw, and that the computer roll commands were sent directly to the roll channels, and the spacecraft flew it the rest of the way on in. And that reentry turned out that we had nominal retros. We were right on the 55-degree line, and it flew it just like it says it's supposed to do it in the book if everything's perfect. And it was. It was right on the money.
Splashdown in the Atlantic was some 35 minutes away. In the prime recovery area, the Department of Defense put 12 aircraft into the air. Above the Rio Grande, the spacecraft entered the sensible atmosphere, usually defined as 400,000 feet altitude. It swept down across the Gulf of Mexico. After the blackout of communications ended, Gemini 11 came in with...
Sounds clear, Houston. We're right on the money with an auto.
The prime recovery ship, the USS Guam, sighted Gemini 11 on the parachute.
Splashdown occurred 71 hours and 16 minutes after liftoff.
Westland leader. Pressure in the water. Gemini 11, should report. Parachute has deflated, over.
Guam reports spacecraft 5,000 yards dead ahead.
Atlantic Chief, this is Westland leader. Flotation gear and 3 swimmers are in the water, over.
I think helicopter drivers are really a breed of their own.
Yeah, I show this for the recovery people. I thought they were trying to sink us, not recover us. He drags the tail wheel right in the water and dumps the swimmers right on top of the spacecraft.
The hatches soon came open, and the crew left their spacecraft to enter a life raft, awaiting a helicopter pickup.
We have some approximate mileage figures here from the carrier. They estimate Gemini 11 was approximately 5 miles away when they got it on the chute, 2.5 to 3 miles away at splash, and the splash was approximately 7 miles from the aim point.
Hoisted aboard the helicopter, they had a short flight this time. The Guam was less than a mile away.
And here is astronaut Pete Conrad, followed by Richard Gordon. Their first steps on the solid surface of this carrier deck in these smooth Atlantic seas. Dick Gordon appears to have something of a heavy beard. They're both smiling.
Like I say, we've been talking without me for days. We had a very good flight, and we'll be back again in a couple nights later, and we'll be ready to go. This whole world looks pretty good from the deck of this carrier, but I'll tell you something else, too. It really looks great from 750 miles. You ought to all see that one. Thank you.
This crew, Command Pilot Conrad and Pilot Gordon, had flown a mission almost precisely to the flight plan. They flew a spacecraft whose systems had no malfunctions which affected mission performance. The early termination of the umbilical EVA emphasized again that we are in a learning period in a totally new and difficult discipline. When you summed it up, there were a host of new records, such as the first rendezvous and docking in the first orbit, a new altitude record of 739 4/10 nautical miles, and a record extra-vehicular time of 3 hours. And the Gemini XI spacecraft ended its mission by demonstrating automatic or computer-controlled re-entry for the first time in manned spaceflight. It was a working flight that saw 10 out of 11 experiments completed successfully, and we increased 3 of those experiments 25 to 30%. Re-rendezvous was added to the flight plan and performed satisfactorily. In the Tether Experiment, we not only opened up new possibilities for station keeping of space vehicles, but we created the first small artificial gravity field with a spin rate of 55 degrees per minute. Spacecraft 11, the next to last Gemini vehicle, had now taken its place in the manned space program of the United States.